Ever catch yourself humming a jingle you haven't heard in years? Or maybe feeling a little thrill of anticipation just by the smell of a certain coffee shop?
Yeah, it's funny how that happens.
It turns out these everyday quirks are tied to some really fundamental principles of how we learn, often in ways we don't even realize.
Uh,
Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take your sources and pull out the most fascinating knowledge.
Today we've delved into a collection of research on the science of learning itself. It's quite a stack.
It is. Our mission, really, is to move past those dry textbook definitions.
Right, and uncover the core mechanisms that drive how we actually pick up new behaviors, new information, all that stuff.
Exactly. We're going to explore three big areas: classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and observational learning.
And we want to give you a real feel for how these work, not just the names.
Think of this as your personal guide to understanding the hidden rules that govern how we adapt and change. Our goal is to give you a clear, insightful grasp of these ideas.
Something you can really chew on and maybe see playing out in your own life.
Okay, let's start with something truly foundational: classical conditioning.
Right. Classical conditioning, at its core, it reveals how our brains are constantly looking for connections.
Clicking links between things.
Exactly. Often forming associations without us even trying. And the discovery itself is a classic story of scientific serendipity.
You mean Ivan Pavlov
Yeah,
and the dogs?
that's the one. He was actually a physiologist studying digestion.
Yeah, I remember reading that. He was focused on saliva, how it helps digestion. Had these little tubes implanted in the dogs. Kind of weird.
A bit, yeah. But here's where it gets interesting. He noticed the dogs started salivating not just when they got the food, but even before, like when they saw the person who usually fed them or heard the food bowls clanging.
It was like they knew what was coming. They'd learned the cues.
Precisely. The salivation to the food itself, that's natural. It's unlearned. That's the unconditioned response, or UCR.
Triggered by the food, the unconditioned stimulus, the UCS.
Right, meat powder in his case. But the salivation to the bowl or the footsteps, that was learned. Pavlov realized the dogs were associating these, well, neutral cues with the food.
So our brains are constantly scanning for patterns, predicting what's next.
Pretty much, even subconsciously. It explains a lot, why we feel comfortable with familiar brands or maybe anxious in certain places based on old associations.
So how did he test this properly?
Well, he designed experiments. He'd pair a neutral signal, something meaningless to the dogs initially, like a tone, with the meat powder. So tone, then food repeatedly.
And at first, the tone did nothing.
Right. But after repeating this pairing, the tone alone started to make the dog salivate.
So the tone became the conditioned stimulus, the CS.
Exactly. And the salivation to the tone, that was the conditioned response, the CR. They'd learned tone predicts food.
Okay, can we think of a more everyday example?
Sure, think about a cat. Let's call her Tiger. Maybe she gets really excited whenever she hears a specific electric can opener.
Okay, because that sound means food.
If that sound consistently happens right before she gets her food, yeah. Eventually, just the sound of the can opener, the CS.
We'll send Tiger running to her bowl. That's the CR.
You got it. Her excitement is the UCR to the food initially, but her excited dash becomes the CR to the sound.
And these associations, they can build on each other, like layers.
Oh, definitely. That's called higher order conditioning. So imagine the cabinet where Tiger's food is kept makes a really distinct squeak right before you use the can opener.
Okay.
Tiger might start getting excited just hearing the squeaky cabinet. The squeak, which was neutral, gets paired with the can opener sound, which is already a CS.
So the squeak itself can start triggering the excitement.
Exactly. It becomes a second-order conditioned stimulus.
Wow. It's amazing how these little cues work. What about Stingray City? In the Cayman Islands, those stingrays weren't born knowing boat engines meant food, right?
No way! Initially, that engine sound would have been just noise, a neutral stimulus.
But the boats meant fishermen cleaning fish.
Right. The fish scraps, that's the UCS, leading to the stingrays seeking food, the UCR. Over time, they learned to associate the engine noise, the CS.
With a potential meal. So now they swarm the boats just at the sound, the CR.
Exactly. It shows how even wild animals form these strong classical conditioning links.
And we see this in humans constantly, probably without even noticing.
Absolutely. Think about a baby, let's call her Angelina, if she always gets her formula in, say, blue canisters.
Okay.
Over time, just seeing that blue canister, the CS, might make her kick her legs or make happy sounds, the CR, even before she smells or tastes the formula, the UCS.
And it's not just about good things like food or excitement. It can be fear, too.
Yes, definitely. Imagine a dog runs into an invisible electric fence for the first time. Ouch.
Right. The shock is the UCS. The pain or yelp is the UCR.
So if the edge of the yard, which was neutral before, is always where the shock happens.
The edge of the yard becomes the CS.
Exactly. And the dog learns to feel fear or anxiety, the CR, just when it gets near the boundary.
Okay, so we're seeing how these links form. What are some of the key processes involved? How does it work?
Well, the first stage is acquisition. That's the initial learning, pairing the neutral stimulus, the NS, with the UCS.
Getting the connection established.
Right. And timing is usually really important here. Typically, the NS needs to come just before the UCS for the strongest link, a fraction of a second often.
But what about taste aversion? That seems different, like getting sick hours after eating something.
Ah, yeah. Taste aversion is fascinating. It's a major exception. Remember that time you got sick after, I don't know, eating some dodgy chicken curry?
Ugh, don't remind me.
Even if it was something else hours later that actually made you sick, you probably developed a strong aversion to that curry, right?
Oh, yeah. Can't even smell it now.
That's taste aversion. It often happens after just one bad experience and with a long delay between eating and getting sick.
So why is it different?
Well, the thinking is there's an evolutionary advantage. It helped us quickly learn to avoid foods that might be poisonous or harmful. Survival instinct, basically.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so what happens if the link isn't useful anymore? Like, you keep using the can opener, but don't give Tiger food.
That leads to extinction. If the CS, the can opener sound, is presented repeatedly without the UCS, the food.
The conditioned response, the running and excitement, fades away.
Exactly. It gradually weakens and might eventually disappear.
But is it gone forever? Sometimes those old reactions pop back up, don't they?
They absolutely can. That's called spontaneous recovery. Even after a CR seems extinguished, gone. After a break, a rest period.
It just reappears.
Often, yeah. Maybe weaker than before, but it comes back. Like Pavlov's dogs might suddenly salivate a little to the tone the next day, even after extinction training.
Or like hearing an ice cream truck jingle after years and feeling that little flicker of excitement.
Exactly like that. It suggests the original learning isn't completely erased, just suppressed.
Okay, so we learn associations. They can fade. They can come back. And we also learn to tell things apart, right? Like, Tiger doesn't run for the blender sound.
Good point. That brings us to stimulus discrimination and stimulus generalization.
Okay.
Discrimination is learning to respond differently to similar stimuli. So Pavlov's dogs learn to salivate to one specific tone, but not other sounds.
And Tiger learns her can opener sound. Not the electric mixer, hopefully.
Right. But then there's generalization, which is kind of the opposite.
Responding to things that are similar to the original stimulus.
Exactly. If you got a new mixer that sounded a lot like the can opener, Tiger might come running, at least initially. That's stimulus generalization.
And this was a big part of the little Albert experiment, right? The generalization.
Huge part. But before we get to Albert, one more related idea. Habituation.
Habituation. Sounds like getting used to something.
Precisely. It's learning not to respond to a stimulus that's presented over and over without changing. Like, you eventually tune out the constant hum of the refrigerator.
Or your neighbor's loud TV after a while.
Yeah.
You just stop noticing it.
Exactly. Your response decreases because the stimulus is unchanging and signals nothing important.
Okay, so let's talk behaviorism. John B. Watson and little Albert. This sounds like a really crucial, though, problematic demonstration of classical conditioning.
It really was. Behaviorism, especially Watson's version, focused almost entirely on observable behavior. Stimulus in, response out.
They weren't too interested in thoughts or feelings.
Not really. Watson was heavily influenced by Pavlov and believed classical conditioning could explain pretty much everything, even complex human emotions like fear.
Which led him to the little Albert experiment. Can you walk us through that? It sounds pretty rough.
It is, by today's standards. Watson and his colleague Rosalie Rayner wanted to show fear could be learned. They worked with a baby, little Albert.
And he wasn't initially scared of, like, a white rat.
Nope. Showed no fear. The white rat was a neutral stimulus, but then, whenever Albert reached for the rat,
They did something scary.
Watson struck a steel bar behind Albert's head. A loud, startling noise, that's the UCS. Albert naturally got scared and cried the UCR.
Oh, man.
They paired the rat, an LS, with the loud noise, UCS, several times. Soon, just seeing the white rat, now the CS, was enough to make Albert cry and try to crawl away, the CR.
He learned to fear the rat.
He did. And crucially, the fear generalized.
So he wasn't just scared of the rat.
No, he started showing fear towards other furry things, too. A rabbit, a fur coat, even a Santa Claus mask with a white beard.
Wow. That's stimulus generalization in action.
A powerful demonstration, yes. But incredibly unethical. They conditioned fear into an infant and apparently made no attempt to decondition it afterward.
Yeah, you definitely couldn't do that today. Serious ethical problems. But it does highlight how pertinent these learned emotional associations are.
Absolutely. And you see this principle used all the time in, say, advertising.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, think about car commercials. They often show the car with attractive, happy people, maybe in beautiful scenery.
Right. Makes it look appealing.
The idea is the positive feelings from those images. The UCS, leading to a positive UCR, get associated with the car, the CS. Hopefully, you then see the car, the CS, and feel good about it, the CR.
So they're trying to condition a positive feeling towards the product.
Exactly. Same with celebrity endorsements. The celebrity's positive image is meant to rub off on the brand.
Which is why companies drop celebrities really fast if there's a scandal, right?
Precisely. They want to avoid that negative association transferring to their product. It's classical conditioning at work in the marketplace.
It's amazing how these subtle pairings influence us. Okay, so that's classical conditioning. Let's shift gears. What about operant conditioning? How's that different?
Operant conditioning is also about learning associations, but it's different. Here, the focus is on learning through the consequences of our own actions.
So not stimulus response like Pavlov, but behavior consequence.
Exactly. In classical conditioning, the stimulus comes before the response and triggers it. In operant conditioning, the behavior happens first, and then the consequence that follows makes the behavior more or less likely in the future.
Okay. And this is where B.F. Skinner comes in, building on Thorndike's law of effect.
That's right. Skinner's work was hugely influenced by Edward Thorndike. Thorndike's law of effect basically says behaviors followed by satisfying consequences get repeated.
And behaviors followed by unpleasant consequences.
Are less likely to be repeated. Discouraged, essentially. It's pretty intuitive, right? You show up for work, you get paid. The pay is a satisfying consequence, so you keep showing up.
Makes sense. And Skinner developed ways to study this systematically. The Skinner box?
Yes, the
Yeah.
operant conditioning chamber or Skinner box. It was a controlled environment, usually for rats or pigeons.
What was inside?
Typically a lever or a disc the animal could press or peck, and a way to deliver consequences, like a food pellet reward or maybe a mild shock, though he focused more on reinforcement.
So he could precisely control the link between the action, like pressing the lever, and the consequence, like getting food.
Exactly. It allowed him to systematically study how different consequences and patterns of consequences affected behavior.
Now, the terms here, positive, negative, reinforcement, punishment,
Yeah.
they have really specific meanings in operant conditioning, don't they? Not quite like everyday use.
Very specific, yes. It's crucial to get these straight. Positive just means adding something. Negative means taking something away.
Okay, adding or subtracting.
Yeah.
And reinforcement versus punishment.
Reinforcement always aims to increase a behavior. Punishment always aims to decrease a behavior.
Got it. So let's break down the combinations. Positive reinforcement.
Okay, positive reinforcement. You add something desirable to increase a behavior.
Like giving a kid a treat for cleaning their room.
Perfect example. Let's say Jerome cleans his room and you give him a toy. The toy is added, making it more likely he'll clean his room again.
Or that Dallas school program paying kids to read books.
Exactly. Adding money to increase reading. Skinner even made a teaching machine based on this, giving immediate positive reinforcement for correct answers.
Okay, adding something good to make a behavior happen more. Now, negative reinforcement. This is a tricky one people mix up with punishment.
It is tricky. Negative reinforcement is taking away something undesirable to increase a behavior.
Taking away something bad to increase behavior. How does that work?
Think of your car's seatbelt alarm. That annoying beeping.
Yes.
That's the undesirable stimulus. What makes it stop?
Putting on your seatbelt.
Right. So by putting on your seatbelt, the behavior, you remove the annoying sound, the negative thing. This makes you more likely to buckle up next time to avoid the sound.
Okay, so you do something to make an annoying thing stop or go away.
Exactly. Or horse training. A rider might apply leg pressure, which the horse finds uncomfortable. When the horse moves correctly, the rider releases the pressure. Removing the pressure reinforces the correct movement.
Got it. It's about escape or avoidance of something unpleasant. Definitely not punishment. Okay, now punishment. Let's start with positive punishment.
Positive punishment, adding something undesirable to decrease a behavior.
Like scolding a student for texting in class.
Yeah. You're adding the verbal reprimand to try and make the texting stop. Or making a child write sentences for hitting their brother, like the example of Brandon. You're adding the unpleasant task.
But punishment, especially this kind, can have downsides, right?
It can. It might teach fear. It could increase aggression in some cases. And it doesn't always teach the right behavior, just suppresses the wrong one.
Okay. And the last one, negative punishment.
Negative punishment. Taking away something pleasant or desirable to decrease a behavior.
Like taking away a toy when a kid misbehaves.
Classic example.
No.
Or the timeout technique. You remove the child from a fun activity or stimulating environment.
Taking away something they like.
Right. To make the misbehavior less likely. For timeout to work best, guidelines suggest removing them from something they actually enjoy to a less interesting spot for a fairly short, age-appropriate time.
Makes sense. Now, what if the behavior you want is really complex? Like, a rat isn't just going to spontaneously play ping pong. How do you teach that?
That's where shaping comes in. It's a really powerful technique.
Shaping. Like molding the behavior.
Kind of. You reward successive approximations toward the target behavior. You don't wait for the perfect action.
So baby steps.
Exactly. First, you reward any behavior that's even slightly in the right direction. Maybe the rat just turns towards the paddle. Reward.
Okay.
Then, once it does that reliably, you only reward it if it gets closer to the paddle. Then maybe only if it touches the paddle. Then only if it pushes it.
So you gradually raise the bar for getting the reward.
Precisely. You reinforce behaviors that get closer and closer to the final goal. It's how animal trainers teach complex tricks.
Like pigeons playing ping pong.
Yep. And it's how parents might teach a kid to clean their room. Maybe first reward just putting one toy away, then a few toys, then making the bed, and so on, shaping it step by step.
Okay, that's clever. Now, we've talked about consequences. Are the rewards themselves different types?
Yes. We distinguish between primary and secondary reinforcers.
Primary, like basic needs.
Exactly. Primary reinforcers have innate biological value. We don't have to learn to like them. Food, water, sleep, warmth, pleasure, they're naturally reinforcing.
And secondary reinforcers.
These get their power through association with primary reinforcers. They aren't inherently valuable. Think money.
Money itself isn't useful, but you can buy food or shelter with it.
Right. So money becomes a powerful secondary reinforcer. Others are praise, stickers, good grades, tokens.
Tokens, like in a token economy.
Yeah, token economies are systems where people earn tokens, like points or chips, for desired behaviors. Then they can exchange these tokens later for actual rewards or privileges.
Like that study with autistic kids earning quiet hands tokens.
Exactly. The tokens, secondary reinforcers, could be traded for playtime, linked to primary reinforcement, perhaps pleasure. It's a common behavior management tool.
Okay, so when you're teaching a new behavior, how often should you give the reinforcement?
Well, initially, the fastest way to teach something new is usually continuous reinforcement.
Rewarding it every single time.
Every single time the behavior occurs. Like giving a dog a treat every time it sits correctly when you first teach it helps establish the link quickly. And immediate reinforcement is usually best.
But you don't keep doing that forever, right?
Usually not. Once the behavior is learned, you often switch to partial reinforcement, also called intermittent reinforcement.
Only rewarding it some of the time.
Right. And interestingly, behaviors learned this way are often much more resistant to extinction. They last longer even when the reward stops.
Why is that?
Maybe because you're used to not getting rewarded every time, so you keep trying for longer when the rewards stop completely.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Are there different ways to do partial reinforcement?
Yep. There are 4 main schedules, based on whether reinforcement depends on time passing or the number of responses, and whether that pattern is fixed or variable.
Okay, break those down for us. First one.
Fixed interval. Reinforcement comes after a set amount of time has passed, assuming the behavior occurred at least once during that time.
Like getting paid every 2 weeks. Or that patient-controlled pain relief example. Dose available every hour.
Exactly. What you often see is a pause in behavior right after reinforcement, then the response rate picks up as the time for the next reward gets closer. Scalloped pattern, they call it.
Okay. What about variable interval?
Variable interval. Reinforcement comes after unpredictable amounts of time. The interval length changes.
Like the manager doing surprise quality control checks at a restaurant. You don't know when they'll show up.
Perfect example. You need to maintain performance because the check could happen anytime. This tends to produce a moderate but steady rate of responding.
All right, so those are based on time. What about schedules based on the number of responses?
Those are ratio schedules. First is fixed ratio. Reinforcement comes after a set number of responses.
Like getting paid for every 10 widgets you make. Piecework.
Exactly. Or the example of Carla, the salesperson, getting a bonus for every 10 pairs of glasses she sells.
What kind of behavior does that produce?
Usually very high rate of response because more responses mean more rewards faster. But there might be a short pause after each reward. And sometimes the focus can shift too much to quantity over quality.
Okay. And the last one, variable ratio. Sounds unpredictable.
It is variable ratio. Reinforcement comes after an unpredictable number of responses. The number changes each time.
Like gambling, slot machines.
The classic example. You don't know if the next pull will be the winner or the 10th or the 100th.
So you just keep pulling the lever.
Exactly. This schedule produces the highest, steadiest rates of response, and crucially, it's extremely resistant to extinction.
Because you never know if the very next try might be the one that pays off.
Precisely. That unpredictability is incredibly powerful. Skinner himself noted how potent variable ratio schedules are.
And this ties into gambling addiction, doesn't it?
It seems to. Research suggests gambling activates brain reward centers similar to addictive drugs. Skinner's work on variable ratio schedules provides a behavioral explanation for why it's so compelling.
Are there specific brain chemicals involved?
Some research points to dopamine, like with many rewards, but also maybe norepinephrine linked to excitement and stress, and possibly serotonin deficits affecting impulse control. But it's complex, and establishing clear cause and effect is difficult.
Right. The schedule itself is a very powerful factor. Okay, we've covered classical and operant conditioning thoroughly. Let's move to the third main type, observational learning.
Right. This one is about learning by, well, watching others.
So not direct experience with stimuli or consequences, but learning from what we see others do.
Exactly. We watch others who we call models, and we imitate them or learn from their experiences.
Is this related to those mirror neurons I've heard about?
It seems to be yes. Mirror neurons are fascinating. They fire both when we perform an action and when we see someone else perform that same action.
So it's like our brain is simulating the action just by watching.
Kind of, yeah. It's thought that this neural mirroring helps us understand and imitate others' actions, playing a key role in observational learning.
Do animals do this too?
Oh, absolutely. The example of chimpanzees learning better ways to, say, suck juice through straws by watching others shows it clearly. But it's incredibly important for humans.
Like that story of Claire's daughter, mimicking the eating behavior with the teddy bear after seeing Claire discipline her son.
That's a powerful, if sobering, example. It shows how readily children especially pick up behaviors by watching adults.
Right.
It highlights that we're wired to learn from others.
And the consequences we see others face act like shortcuts for our own learning.
Definitely. It demonstrates the huge responsibility of role models, for good or bad.
So it's more than just basic imitation then.
Much more. This is where Albert Bandura's work, his social learning theory, is key. He emphasized the role of cognitive processes.
Thinking, memory.
Yes, we don't just automatically copy everything. Bandura said we pay attention, we remember, we have to be physically able to reproduce the action, and crucially, we need motivation. Learning can happen even without us getting direct reinforcement.
So what are the different ways this kind of learning can happen?
Well, Bandura pointed out a few things. We can learn completely new responses just by watching someone else do them.
Like learning a dance move from a video.
Exactly. We can also choose whether to imitate based on what happens to the model. Did they get rewarded or punished? That's vicarious reinforcement or vicarious punishment.
Learning from their outcomes.
Right. And we can also learn general rules or strategies from watching others that we can then apply in new situations.
Okay. And Bandura talked about different kinds of models too, right? Who we learn from?
Yes. 3 main types. Live models are people we observe directly, in person.
Like watching a friend surf and trying to copy them, like Ben watching Julian.
Perfect. Then there are verbal instructional models. They don't show the behavior, but they explain or describe it.
Like a soccer coach telling you how to kick the ball.
Exactly. And the third type is symbolic models. These are characters in books, movies, TV shows, video games, or even real people portrayed in the media.
So learning from fictional characters or celebrities we see online or on TV.
Absolutely. Symbolic models are hugely influential in modern society.
So what are the actual steps involved? If I watch someone do something, what needs to happen for me to learn it and do it myself?
Bandura outlined 4 key steps in the modeling process. First is attention.
You have to actually notice what the model is doing. Pay attention.
Right. If you're distracted, you won't learn much. Second is retention.
Remembering what you saw, storing it in memory.
Exactly. You need to be able to recall the steps or the action later. Third is reproduction.
Being physically able to do it.
Yes. You might watch a gymnast do an amazing flip, pay attention, and remember it, but lack the physical skill to reproduce it yourself.
Gotcha. And the last step.
Motivation. You need a reason to want to copy the behavior.
And that's where those vicarious consequences come in?
Largely, yes. Vicarious reinforcement, seeing the model get rewarded for the behavior, increases your motivation to copy it.
Like Allison seeing her sister get praised for doing chores might make Allison want to do chores.
Potentially, yes. And vicarious punishment, seeing the model get punished or face negative consequences, decreases your motivation.
Like Allison seeing her sister get in trouble for using makeup might make Allison less likely to try it.
Exactly. That calculation of what happened to them strongly influences our motivation to imitate.
And Bandura's most famous experiment really showed this, didn't it? The Bobo doll study.
Oh, absolutely. The Bobo doll experiments are landmark studies in observational learning, especially regarding aggression.
Can you remind us quickly what happened there?
Sure. Basically, children watched an adult model interacting with this inflatable Bobo doll. Some kids saw the adult act aggressively hitting the doll, kicking it, yelling things like, "Socceroo!"
Okay.
Other kids saw the adult play quietly and ignore the doll. Then, the kids were put in a room with the Bobo doll and other toys.
And what did they find?
The results were pretty clear. The children who had watched the aggressive model were much more likely to be aggressive towards the doll themselves.
They copied the hitting and kicking.
Yes, and often they imitated the specific actions and even the words the adult model had used.
Wow. Did it matter if the adult was rewarded or punished?
Yes. In later variations, Bandura showed that if the kids saw the aggressive model being punished, they were less likely to imitate the aggression. If they saw the model rewarded or faced no consequences, imitation was higher. Vicarious consequences matter.
So we learn by watching, and what happens to the person we're watching really influences whether we copy them. This has huge implications, positive and negative.
Absolutely. Let's think about the positive side first, pro-social effects.
Learning helpful or positive behaviors by watching.
Exactly. Parents who read to their kids often encourage reading in their children. People who model honesty, generosity, or helping others can inspire similar behaviors.
Like seeing public figures advocate for peace or justice. Martin Luther King Jr., Gandhi.
Great examples of powerful pro-social models influencing millions through symbolic modeling. It encourages you to think about your own pro-social models, right? Who inspires positive actions in you?
That's a good question. But there's a flip side, isn't there? The antisocial effects.
Unfortunately, yes. The same principles apply. Research has shown, for instance, that many children who are abused grow up to become abusers themselves, potentially learning that pattern of behavior through observation.
That's incredibly sad. And what about violence in media? TV, movies, video games?
That's a big area of research and debate. Many studies suggest a correlation between exposure to media violence and increased aggression in viewers, especially children.
So watching violence might teach aggressive scripts or desensitize people to it?
That's the concern. The idea is that observing rewarded or unpunished violence might lower inhibitions against aggression or teach new ways to be aggressive. There is also the concept of desensitization, becoming less emotionally responsive to violence after seeing a lot of it.
Is the link definite? Does watching violence cause aggression?
Establishing direct causation is really complex. There are many factors involved in aggression. But the sheer volume of violence many people, especially kids, are exposed to through media is concerning. One statistic mentioned was the average American high school graduate has seen thousands of acts of violence. That level of exposure likely has some effect, even if it's hard to pin down precisely how much.
It's definitely food for thought. A powerful reminder of how much we learn just by being around others and consuming media. Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into learning, what are the main takeaways?
Well, we've explored these 3 fundamental ways we learn. Classical conditioning, where we form associations between stimuli, like Pavlov's dogs.
Operant conditioning, learning from the consequences of our actions, rewards, and punishments, like Skinner studied.
And observational learning, learning by watching others, like Bandura showed with the Bobo doll.
And these aren't totally separate, right? They work together.
Absolutely. They often interact in complex ways, constantly shaping our behaviors, our habits, our emotions, even our social interactions, often without us being fully aware of it.
So understanding these basic principles gives us a lens, really, to understand ourselves and others better.
I think so. It provides a powerful framework for figuring out why we do the things we do.
It's clear that learning is just this continuous, dynamic process that fundamentally shapes who we become. So here's a final thought for you, our listener.
Yeah.
Maybe take some time this week to, actively look for these principles at play.
Yeah, where do you see them?
How are those classical